class discussion and how to prepare, provide class presentations. Okay, so again, if you could type into the chat, why is participating in class discussions important? Why do you think it's important? And then what are your personal concerns about participating in class discussions? And that can be, whether that is an in-person class or a class online on Zoom. What are the kind of things that are concerning you about this? So as you are typing into the chat, I'm going to keep going with this, but I want to make sure that I'm addressing your concerns as well. So please do feel free to type into the chat, and also please feel free to type your questions into chat anytime as well. And I will try to monitor at the same time to make sure I'm addressing those. Okay. So moving on, okay, yes. So Hyjin says about concerned about the lack of English proficiency, and that is completely understandable, and definitely it'll take some practice and it will take some confidence to participate in class discussions, and that is one of the things that we wanted to talk about today. That can be a nice thing about the online classes, is that you might be able to type your questions into chat, and that might feel a little more comfortable than speaking verbally, speaking audibly. Yes, also Ilker says participating in class discussions is important because this way you have the opportunity to learn about other people's perspectives. Exactly. Yeah, so that is one of the things we're going to talk about today, as well as kind of how to add to the class discussion so that you are, part of discussing is not just speaking, but it's also listening. So we're going to talk about how to listen to other people's comments and participate so that you're discussing, whether you're adding or disagreeing. And Natalia says it's important to learn so you can remember what you learn. Exactly, it's an active way of learning. And thank you, Natalia. That is exactly what we talk about at the Dennis Learning Center all the time. That's what we study, is active learning. So it's a really great way to actively engage in the material in class and to really get the most out of your class. So it's really important to participate in classes. Yeah, Muhammad says that he's concerned about not being able to properly convey his point virtually. And that, yeah, it's a challenge. It can be a challenge. So it's something that I think people are getting more used to. And is something, if you are concerned about that, I would definitely recommend talking with your professor. If there are class discussions and you're feeling like you're not able to get your point across, I know that in the classes that I've had and that I've taught, that it is really beneficial to have this chat feature, because you can kind of think about things for a little bit longer instead of having to say them, in the moment and speak very quickly. You can think a little bit more and type into the chat and still participate in the discussion. But there are different ways to do that. And if you're feeling like it's a struggle to keep up or to get your point across, definitely talk with your professor, and there might be some strategies that they have. Yes, okay, yeah, Natalia says about being possibly the only international student in some classes could make you feel a little more introverted and concerned. And that's, yeah, I agree. We do have a lot of international students here at Ohio State, which is wonderful. We're so glad you're all here, or here virtually. And so it is, but it is a concern. Sometimes you might be the only international student in a class, but definitely you are a participant and your opinion matters and it is valued in that class. So remember to, take confidence in that, and that you are part of that class, and it is okay. Yes, and that's something, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Fidyavana says, that participating in discussions increases your engagement and your focus. And that's exactly right. Yeah, it does help you to focus on the material and what you're talking about. And it is great practice for developing your speaking skills. So that, again, the clearly expressing your ideas and how to formulate it, it takes, but kind of just like what you're saying, it takes practice. It is a little bit of a challenge to get it out, and that can be true for native English speakers as well, but it definitely takes practice. And I will, let you know that a lot of native English speakers could use this presentation as well, because they are scared about participating in class discussions. It can be really intimidating to speak in front of a whole class, especially if it's a big class. So it is, I get it, and it is definitely okay to feel nervous, but I also encourage you to really jump in and to make the most of your, because we talked about how important class discussions are and participating is to your learning. So definitely try and give it a shot, and I hope that it works for you. And we're going to give you some tips to make you feel more confident when you do. All right, so let's talk about preparing for class discussions. And this is something that I feel like we might not talk about as much, is really feeling prepared, and that can make you feel more confident. So make sure that you do the readings or practice problems, whatever's assigned to do before class, make sure that you do that. It's going to make you feel like you are understanding the material and the topics that are being talked about in that class. Do take notes during class. That's another way of active learning, so that you are paying attention and staying engaged during the class. And then prepare questions ahead of time. If you have questions written down, from the reading, you can write them down ahead of time. Really think about how you want to formulate your thoughts. And then it's not as scary to think in the moment, what am I trying to say? But you can prepare it ahead of time. So I definitely recommend preparing questions ahead of time, especially if it's a discussion-based class. It's a great thing to do. Also, so when we're talking about taking notes during class, there are lots of ways to take notes, and we have a whole workshop on taking notes. So there are lots of different ways that you can do it, but just as an example, use what works best for you and what works best for the material that you're learning. So it can be just kind of an outline, like you can see here on the right. It could be making a mind map, like you see here on the left, if it's more kind of looking at relationships between different points of the material. It can also be, this is a great way if you're thinking about questions that you want to bring into class or into a class discussion. This type of note taking is called the Cornell Method. It's based on a method from Cornell University, so it's called Cornell Method. Basically, on the top right section here, it's 3 different sections. If you can see, the paper's divided into 3 sections by these lines. And this side is the outline, just like what is happening during class. You're just taking notes on what the professor's saying, what the discussion is. Then at the bottom is a summary. So you summarize the whole paper to say, like, just overall what happened today in class. And then on the left, this is a key point, that you put the questions that you want to ask. So this can either be clarifying questions of like, I didn't really understand that, can we go back? Or going beyond the material to say, oh, what if this happened? Or why is that? Different kinds of questions and main points you can put in the left side here. This is a great way to take notes while you're reading. And then you can bring these questions with you to the class discussion. It makes it a little bit easier than trying to think of those questions in the moment. So what kind of questions? You can definitely bring those I'm confused about, I didn't understand questions. That's super important to bring to class, but also, go beyond. So think of summarizing. What's the main idea of what I just read or what I just heard? What is the big picture? What's the most interesting point to you personally? That's going to really help you remember it better. And then also, do you agree or disagree? These are college classes. Not everything is, everything is debatable, like you can agree or disagree with different points or different ways that the information is presented. So think about whether you agree or disagree, or you have questions, or questions of how the material is connected to each other as well. So think about all those different types of questions when you're preparing for class. Okay, so that's one big part about preparing for class discussions, and I think that can go a long way in making you feel more confident when you get to class. It's just doing that preparation ahead of time. Can really help for studying as well. It makes studying for the test so much faster because you already have all those questions done. Then once you're in class, let's talk about some strategies here. So please do take an active role. Ask relevant questions. So relevant just meaning, you know, it's staying on topic. You're not going too far away from what the class is talking about. And then also answer questions. The professors often ask questions, and one way to just be active in class is by answering those questions. Sometimes, you know, this is the part that can feel pretty scary, especially if you're not sure if you have it right. But you really, especially if you want to remember this information, that is the biggest way to do it, is to take an active role and say, I'm going to speak up and answer this question. And even if I'm wrong, I'm going to give it a shot. And I think I know. So it really helps you to remember that information because now you have a personal engagement with it. Also make comments and give your own opinion. And then agree or disagree and explain why. That's an important point. We're going to talk about different ways to do all of these things. So let's talk about initiating participation in class. So how do you get into participation? How do you start it? So in the US, what we do, you signal your intention to say something. In-person classes, we would raise our hand. Some people raise them very high, some people raise it kind of low, but some sort of signal to say, I have something to say. Sometimes you can make eye contact with, especially if it's a smaller class, if you make eye contact with a professor or with the person speaking, that can be helpful. But that can be a little challenging in online classes. So in online classes, they do have, if you've seen it before, I don't know if I can do it now, but they have the reactions that you can use in the Zoom meetings. So you can actually digitally raise your hand. If anybody sees the reactions to raise your hand, try it now. And you can see what it looks like so that you raise your hand to say, I have a question or I agree. Those are great ways to do that in Zoom classes. But also if you just have a question, go ahead and just type it right into chat. Oh yes, thank you, Natalia, you did it. So, so yeah, these are great ways to do it virtually. You can type the chat into, and notice in the chat, you can do it publicly so the whole class can see, and sometimes you can do it privately. So if you only want one person, like the professor or another student to see your comment, you can do it to one person in particular. It's kind of nice, actually, a different aspect of Zoom classes that is different than the in-person type of class. So make use of that chat feature too. Okay, so that's all about just initiating, but also, again, this is a little bit more in-person stuff, but pay attention to verbal and physical cues. So when people are asking you questions, that's a key time to initiate. You know, they want your opinions, they want your thoughts. If somebody pauses and waits for somebody to jump into the conversation, or if they're looking around saying like, who's there, who's doing this? Those are all those kind of verbal and physical cues that they want your participation. This again, tends to be in person. For virtual participation, it's much more explicit. So kind of like I've been saying, please type into chat. Like I'm telling you, here's how to participate. Go ahead and do it now. So those are really more explicit cues for participation. But in some smaller classes or discussion-based classes, there can still be those verbal and physical cues that it is time to jump in when it's a small group and you can see everyone talking. So it's a little bit more challenging on Zoom. So I know that in some of my discussion-based classes, we have in chat, we'll type C for I have a comment. That means it's kind of like raising your hand, but you kind of get in a line to say like, I have a comment, and then Caroline types C and she has a comment, or she types Q and has a question. So those are some different strategies for classes to say like, I'm next to speak. I would like to speak next. And it keeps a little bit more organized when it's a little challenging on Zoom. Another thing that you can do to participate actively in small groups is offer to take notes for the group. And this is a great way to make sure that you are staying engaged and also understanding what everyone is saying. And make sure that you are participating, even if you aren't verbally talking a lot, you are still taking notes for the group and making sure you are understanding everything. So when you want to initiate, you want to express your own opinion, there's certain ways to do it in the US that that can be a little more acceptable, I guess, for discussions in classes. So by having these beginning statements that say things like, I think, or I believe. So something about you. I think, I believe, I feel. It seems to me, I suppose, I guess. Notice they're all I. So this is my personal opinion. These are my thoughts. That's what I'm saying. If you're answering a factual question, that's different. But if it's a discussion and you want to express your thoughts and opinions, start with that I statement. I think or I believe. So let's practice a little bit. So in the chat, share your opinions about what is the best. I want to know what is the best animal and why is it the best? A really simple question, but what's your opinion on the best? Make sure to use those I statements. Go ahead and type into chat now. As an example, I say, I think the best animals are turtles, and I believe they are the cutest animals because, well, I believe they're the cutest animals because I have a turtle and he is the cutest animal. So, so that's my opinion on what is the best animal. But what does everybody else think? I'll give you a few minutes here. As you're typing, I might bring up the kind of emphasis that I put on the words. So I said, I think, so I kind of emphasize the I think that the best animals are turtles. That's often that emphasis on the I is if you really are saying that I have a different opinion from what other people are saying. This is what I think. If you are kind of guessing or supposing, a better emphasis is to put it on the think or feel or believe. I think the best animals are turtles. It makes it sound a little less sure that you're just, well, I suppose, I guess. Yeah, okay, so I'm having a hard time picking one, but I think I'm gonna go with cats because they're very sweet. At the same time, they're independent and self-sufficient. That's great. Yes, thank you. So that is, it really sounds like, you know, I'm thinking about this, like you said, I think, and you're not entirely sure, but this is my opinion. Okay, so now try it the same thing, but without those introductions. So basically you would just say, the best animal is the turtle. It doesn't sound that, you know, the best animal is the turtle. It just sounds like this is a fact. And it doesn't sound like your opinion. So when you make sure to differentiate between those two things, when you're stating a factual or a concept, like if the professor asks a question about a concept, that's okay to just say, this is the answer. But if it's your opinion, your thoughts, make sure to use that I think, I feel. Yes, thank you. We got dogs, toy poodles, yes. And cats. Okay, dogs and cats, I love it. Yes. Okay. They lay around all day long. I love it. Yeah, that's a good reason to have a good lifestyle. Both dogs and cats do have good lifestyles. I agree. Turtles do too, I will say. Well, at least my turtle does. Okay, thank you guys. Okay, a few other little points about participating in class. If you feel like you need to interrupt while someone is speaking, especially if they are talking for a long time, here are some ways to do this. Definitely say, excuse me. That's a great way to just break into conversation. If I'm talking for a long time and you are like, oh, I really have this question, or I'm not understanding what you're saying, or I can't hear you, or something like that, excuse me is a great way. Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but, and then you can ask your question. Or I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, means I didn't understand that. Or I didn't understand that last point. Could you repeat that? When you say that, do you mean, so these are different ways to interrupt while still saying, I'm listening to you, but I need a little bit more clarification. That's appropriate reason to interrupt someone, is because you are trying to understand what they are saying, but you're having difficulty. If you want to comment, if somebody's made an opinion or a thought and you want to comment on what someone else has said, here's some suggestions on ways to do it. You can say, I think Caroline made an interesting point. And so then you add on your thoughts onto that part. Or I'd like to add something to what Natalia said, or to go along with what Canon said. So these are different ways. So it's really nice if you can say the person's name, especially on Zoom calls. It makes a big difference because it can be hard to see everyone at once. So it's really helpful to say who you're commenting about. Or if it's just the general topic, you don't have to use somebody's name. But like going off that point, I think, so these are just some suggestions on ways to comment on what another person has said. It really helps make it a real discussion when you're commenting back and forth. When you're agreeing with someone else, you can just say, I agree with what the person said. For example, here's my example to add to the conversation. Make sure it's adding something to the conversation too. Or you can say, like Caroline said that, cats are great. I agree with that statement because, just like you guys gave all your reasons for your favorite animals, or the best animal, I should say, then those are the reasons. And then you can say, I agree, in my opinion, and then you can elaborate on what your opinion is and give your perspective. So those are great ways to agree. Just say, I agree is a great way to do it. But you can also say, like, I think that is a good example, or I think that's great. Use those I think statements. Now, if you want to disagree with something that a previous speaker says, basically you can say, I disagree, I don't agree, but also add why you don't agree. So very important to say that. So I don't agree with what they said about, cats. I think that they aren't as sweet, something like that. Or they said this, I would argue that it's a little bit different. You can also kind of, especially if you're not sure, you can say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that, dogs are not, are maybe more mean than sweet, or something like that. And so you can say, I don't really know because I don't have a dog, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but here's my opinion. So those are some different ways to disagree with a previous speaker. And you can reframe disagreements in constructive ways. So you might be thinking, what that person is saying doesn't make sense at all. But that can be a little bit of a harsh way to say that out loud in a discussion. So you can kind of say it a little bit more considerately and say, I don't know if I agree. Could you elaborate on what you're talking about? Or you can say, I'm not sure that I understand what you're talking about. Could you elaborate? So again, using those I statements makes it a little bit less of a harsh thing, and saying, you don't make sense, say, I don't understand. Or if somebody's talking and you think, I don't think that's the right answer, you could say something like, maybe we should look up how to do the problem and try it again. Or let's vote on it versus does everyone agree? So there are a little bit more constructive ways to make sure that you're engaging everyone and using those I statements to say, this is my opinion. Okay, so that's all about doing class discussions. Now talking about shaping discussions. So what are you talking about? When you're trying to connect your statement to, like, refer to the readings that you had, like you read something for class, you did your preparation before the discussion, and so now you want to refer to that, you can say something about the author or the textbook. You give the author's name, they suggest that this, or according to the author, or according to the textbook, or according to chapter 5. There are different ways to say that, but basically make sure that you refer to what you read. If you have a page number, that's even better, but if you don't, that's okay. Qualifying your contribution. What this means is just saying, like, in my experience. So something like, I'm not familiar with the situation in the US, but in my country, this is how this works. That is, oh, I can't tell you how great of a comment that is for class discussions and for American students to hear about your experience is so important. So I really encourage you to do this, but also, to say, like, I don't really know much about how, preschool works in the United States, but in China, this is how it works. Something like that. Or I don't have firsthand experience with that, but what I got from reading the textbook was this. So qualifying, saying, this is how I know about this information. So please, I think it's so important for you to share your experiences, especially with American students, so that they know. It can be very interesting and enlightening for American students. So I encourage you to do that. But it can also help you to understand the differences and the similarities in different experiences. Also, indicate when you are speculating or guessing. So when you're saying, like, I'm not really sure, but here's what I think, here's what I guess. So you can say, I'm just guessing, but I think students may have misunderstood, or one factor might be, or perhaps. So these are all ways to say, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not really positive on the information, but I think this is my opinion, or this is my guess. Very, very acceptable to say that in conversation. Okay, so here's an overall review. Remember to be prepared. This goes a long way to feeling more confident in class discussions. So read, think, and write questions beforehand. Practice your useful phrases for class discussions, and then be confident. So the content matters more than the way you say it, but that's why being prepared is so important. And just being confident, especially when you're talking about your own experience, that's really important. So, and you're an expert on yourself, so that you can be confident in talking about that. And if you feel like a better way is to type it into the chat instead of saying it audibly, that's okay too. That's a perfectly fine way in online classes, so it can actually be a benefit. Please, again, if you do have any questions during this, please do type them into the chat. I have it up at the same time, so I can kind of monitor the chat at the same time, so please do ask questions. Okay, and next we're going to be talking about class presentations. So again, this tends to be more for in-person presentations, but a lot of it is very similar for virtual presentations, which you might have more of. Now in online classes, it's a little bit different and a little bit easier to do presentations, because it could be just recording a video. That's still, all of this information still works the same way. So keep in mind, how it will work in person versus virtually, but I think it can work for both of them. Okay, so we're going to talk about preparing presentations, practicing, how to handle those questions that happen during presentations, and then overcoming that fear of public speaking, which everybody has. So again, a big thing for confidence is planning, preparation. So make sure to do research on your topic and narrow down your focus. So make sure that you know what the focus of your presentation is, And then also be aware of your audience. What do they know and what do you want them to know? So when you structure your presentation, this is very general, you know, it might depend on what you're presenting on, but the general structure of a presentation is kind of like an hourglass, kind of like this picture shows, that you start out with a very general topic statement or the scope of the presentation saying like, here's what I'm going to be talking about. And it's very broad, and here's why it's important. Here's why I'm interested in it, whatever is important for the presentation. Then start to get narrower and narrower, saying like, here's some details. Here's some really examples. Here's some really specific things about this content. And then at the end, then you summarize and you bring it broad again. So you summarize the main points and say, again, here's all of what I talked about in a summary. And then here's why it's important. Here's why I'm interested in it. Here's why everyone should care about this information. So make it really broad. So it's kind of that hourglass shape. Does that make sense? This is similar to how you would structure papers as well, but presentations, it's really helpful to have that. It can depend on the length of the presentation and the, you know, the topic and what you're supposed to be doing, but that's a general good structure to have. So at the beginning, make sure to give them a roadmap. So kind of like what I've been doing at the beginning here of saying like, here's what we're going to be talking about. So it's the 3 T's, which is kind of ridiculous. But first, tell them what you're going to tell them. Start out with an outline, and then tell them the information. And then at the end, tell them what you've told them. It's kind of a weird 3 T's, but basically you're giving them a preview, you give them the information, and then you give them a review at the end, and you summarize at the end and say, here's what we talked about. So you essentially are reviewing the information 3 times. You go into more detail in the actual middle part, but it really helps to keep your audience engaged and to help them know what you're talking about and when you're talking about it. Make sure to prepare notes for your presentation. Again, this can differ whether you're doing it in person or online, but definitely having notes is a great thing to do. Now, I didn't say a whole text. So what you can do is start your presentation as a whole text, like you write out a paper or something. But if you just read a paper as a presentation, it doesn't sound very good. So what you want to do is write out your whole text and then convert it to spoken language. So what does that mean? Shorter sentences, usually shorter words, more pauses, and you have a lot of emphasis. So you highlight those key words. So kind of like I said, key words. I emphasized it. I slowed down when I said those words. That's a way to say this is important. So now you can place those keywords on note cards. If you're doing this in person in front of a class, you can have note cards in front of you. If you're doing it on Zoom or something, you can have notes, you know, in paper in front of your computer or on the screen or something like that in the PowerPoint. But make sure that you have keywords. If you're just reading a script, it makes you feel more comfortable because you know exactly what you're going to say, but it does not sound very good and it can be hard to listen to. So this is where practicing helps. Any questions about that part? So basically you can start with your whole text and write out a script, but then when you practice, convert it into just keywords. And then hopefully you can add in the spoken language with the keywords. If you're creating PowerPoint slides for the presentation, make sure that you're not putting basically the general rules, don't put too many words on the slide. Slides should be fun and engaging. How fun, you know, depends on the class and the content and the formality of the presentation, but they should be engaging. But most importantly, they should be easy to read and understand. So making sure that the font is big enough and make sure that the words are clear and understandable. Like it's really hard to read the white on the different colors here. So just make sure it's easy to read and understand. and then have main points only, those key words. That's a great way to make a PowerPoint presentation. And then adding in pictures and things to make it visually appealing. If you are using PowerPoint, they have design ideas. I would definitely recommend using those. It makes it, they tell you how to make your PowerPoints pretty. It's great. Okay, so practicing and using feedback. This is a YouTube video. I'm gonna try and play it now. If it doesn't work, I have the information here as well, but we'll see if it works. Hang on one. Actually, you know what? I don't know that we have time to do it. So I will give you the link to this. It's only like a 3-minute video, so you can watch it later, but it's basically tips for public speaking. It's a TEDx video from a public speaking coach. And her 5 tips are: first, know your content. This is that preparation stage. You need to know what you're talking about. Second, be authentic. Be you. If you include your personality in the presentation, whether that's in the pictures that you include in your PowerPoint or in the examples that you give, but make sure to smile and be authentic. Be you. Making eye contact. Again, this is a little bit different for in-person versus virtual. Right now, of course, I'm staring at my computer screen and I can't see you guys. So I assume I'm making eye contact, but it's really hard to tell. So basically make sure that you're looking at the camera for Zoom presentations. If you are in person, then you can look through the crowd. 3 to 5 seconds is the eye contact length. Now it can be, that makes it make you forget what you're talking about if you're trying to count amount of eye contact, but this is something you can practice. It feels like a long time to make eye contact with someone for 3 to 5 seconds. For you, it feels like a long time. For the person who's watching you, it doesn't. So that's the difference. That's another thing I would say about presentations is giving pauses. And especially if you ask a question and you want your audience to think about it and answer you, you need to wait at least 7 seconds. It feels like an eternity when you are just sitting there thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It feels like a really long time when you're presenting, but for your audience, they're digesting the information that you've been talking about and thinking about formulating a question in their minds. So it does take them some time. So make sure that you give ample pauses to let your listeners think. And then also what to do with your hands. Again, you can see I talk with my hands a lot, even in Zoom presentations, but if you are nervous, it's something that people can see your nerves in your hands. So basically what this coach recommends is relax your hands. If you feel like it's easier for you to hold something like a pencil or your note cards or something, that's okay too. But it is basically just relax your hands. You don't need to do anything with them. And filler words like so, like, I know I use these too. It can be hard to take these out of your presentation, but practice helps with that. Also, just pausing and letting your listener think can be a great thing. You don't need to fill every second. Okay, so make sure that you practice, practice, practice. This is the best thing for public speaking. It's the best thing for your confidence and for just making sure that you know what you're doing. So rehearse your presentation in front of your friends, your family, your roommate, a mirror. You can record yourself easily on Zoom. You can just set up a Zoom meeting for yourself and just record yourself and see how it looks. Time yourself, very important. Especially if you're doing this in person, you will speak faster in person than you do when you practice because we're nervous. When we're nervous, we speak faster. So the time will go faster. So do make sure that you time yourself and practice. and use feedback. So pay attention to your body language and voice. So use the feedback from your audience. Again, on Zoom, this can be difficult because you don't get any feedback because there's nobody out there. You are out there, but I can't see you. So if you are in person, or if you have everybody, if you can see everyone on the Zoom meeting, then use that eye contact and movement and volume. And they might be, raising their hands or asking questions or things like that. If they are shifting in their seats, or if this is in person, kind of looking away a lot or looking down, that might be time to change it up a little bit, to add some emphasis to your voice, or to move around. If you're in a classroom, you can walk around the front of the classroom. That helps to keep people engaged. Okay. The part about class presentations that is the hardest to prepare for, and possibly is the scariest, is the question and answer sessions. So do allow time at the end of your presentation for questions. That is important and kind of expected for presentations here in the US. So do allow time at the end, just a couple minutes, but make sure, okay, if you are getting some questions from the audience, this is especially if you are in person, but it also works on Zoom. If somebody asks a question, make sure you repeat the question. So think about if you are sitting in a big lecture hall and you're in the front, the person in the front asks a question, they're facing the person who's speaking. The people in the back can't hear what they're saying. So you, as a speaker, if you're facing everyone, you need to repeat the question that you are asked. This is great for a couple reasons. It allows everyone in the room to know the question that was asked. It allows you to make sure that you understood what was being asked. It also gives you a couple more seconds to think about the answer. It really helps to prepare yourself. It's just saying, okay, let me make sure I understood correctly. Here's what you were asking, and you can repeat the question. It helps so much to keep yourself focused and to keep the whole audience focused as well. If you don't understand the question, you can say, here's what I think you're asking, but can you clarify? If you couldn't hear them or don't understand at all, just ask them to repeat the question or to clarify the question. That's okay. When you're answering the question, make sure you direct your remarks to everyone. That can really help. If it is a specifically individual question, then you can say, we can talk about this later, just you and me together. But if it's something that everyone should hear the answer to, then direct your answer to everyone. It helps keep everyone engaged. And then also allow follow-up questions. If the person, you answer their question and they say, well, I have a follow-up question to that. That's okay too. You can get into kind of a discussion, and that's great. That means that they're really interested in what you're talking about. If you don't know the answer, this is really important and can be scary, but it's such a great thing to do. It makes you, actually, it feels like a little contradictory, but if you don't know the answer, say you don't know. It actually makes you look more confident, because you say you don't know, but you also follow it up to say, I don't know, but I will find out. That's the important point. Make sure you say, I will find out, and I can get back to you. I can email you the answer. I can find out later. If you have a guess, you can give your guess and say, I will confirm that later. I will look it up and I will confirm it, and then do that. Make sure that you do it. But that makes you look so much better than just guessing, and you might be getting it wrong. But it's okay not to know the answer. So do admit it. It does take confidence. So let's talk about confidence, overcoming a fear of public speaking. One of the biggest things with public speaking is just practice. Practice really helps to build your confidence, to make sure that you feel like you know what you're going to say and when you're going to say it, and to make sure that everything works as you expected. There's no surprises, and that helps so much with confidence. So develop a pre-routine. This is kind of about reducing your anxiety right before you do a presentation. So your pre-routine is something like taking a few breaths, visualizing yourself being successful, remember to speak slowly, remember to smile. Even if you are on a video or on Zoom, smiling changes your voice. It changes your voice. It also usually helps you to speak slower, which can help people understand you better. Remember that experience builds confidence. Practice, practice, practice helps so much. One of our international students suggested, they said, often what international students really lack is a little courage to take the first step. So I hope that this presentation gave you some courage to take that first step. I think it's so important to participate in classes for both you and for the American students in your class. So I hope that you feel emboldened and confident in your class participation and you have a great time this semester. All right, thank you so much. I'm gonna, let me, have you guys gone over all of the DLC information? I can do it real quickly. Caroline. I don't know if everybody's heard it already or not, but
Sorry, I missed the last thing you said, Jackie. Can you say that again?
The Dennis Learning Center information.
Oh, yeah. So a lot of our participants today, I think, have been in the previous workshops, and I know that Tyler has been good about going over a lot of that, but maybe we can put the web link for where they can find more info if needed.
Yes. So yeah, if you have any questions, definitely let us know. We have workshops, we have courses, we have coaching, one-on-one, but go to our website. It's got everything.
Yeah, so many great.
dennislearningcenter.osu.edu.
Yeah, lots and lots of great services there. So yeah, thank you so much, Jackie, for presenting. That's wonderful. So there are even more workshops, I believe, than the ones that we're offering in this series. So definitely check those out. I would also highlight the course that we offer for international students through the Dennis Learning Center, which I know most of you have probably heard me say this a number of times now, but I'll just put the number here. It's ESE PSY 2060, which is an academic success series course for international students. Oh, I just sent that just to Jackie. Let me send that to everyone. There we go. All right. Well, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those into the chat or say them out loud. I'll stay on the call for just a couple minutes in case any questions come in. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. And please do consider registering for the course or the workshop that we have tomorrow on academic conduct, because that's going to be our last one and a really important one as well. So I hope to see you back there. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your morning or evening or wherever it is, where you are in the world. Oh, that's Penny.